When Marcus Thornfield finds his late wife's cryptic final letter on the anniversary of her death, he never expects the blizzard that night to deliver the very miracle she promised. A desperate widow with ice blue eyes and 3 children will either fulfill Isabella's dying wish or destroy everything Marcus has left to protect. This is a story about love that transcends death, about family connections that survive the impossible, and about children who become the bridge between past grief and future hope. Hit that like button if you believe in divine interventions, because what happens when Marcus discovers who Catherine really is will prove that some promises reach beyond the grave. The girl with ice blue eyes. Widower found his dead wife's final gift in a blizzard. The letter arrived 4 years too late. Marcus Thornfield sat in the study of Iron Creek Ranch holding the envelope his foreman Carlos had just handed him. The paper was yellowed with age. The ink faded but still legible in his late wife's elegant script. For Marcus to be opened on the 4th anniversary of my death. Outside, Montana Territory was preparing for what the almanac predicted would be the worst blizzard in a decade. But inside this room, surrounded by Isabella's books and the lingering scent of her lavender soap that somehow still clung to the curtains, time had stopped entirely. Marcus's hands trembled as he broke the wax seal Isabella had pressed with her wedding ring. 4 years of grief. 4 years of wondering what final words she might have wanted to share. 4 years of living in the shadow of her memory. And now this. The letter was brief, written in the shaking hand of a woman whose strength was failing. My dearest Marcus, if you are reciting this, then I am gone, and it is time for you to begin living again. I know you, my stubborn cowboy. You will try to preserve my memory by refusing to love again. But I have one last gift to leave you, one final piece of our story that isn't finished yet. Watch for a woman with ice blue eyes, Marcus. She will come when the winter is darkest, when you think hope itself has frozen solid. She will bring with her the family we always dreamed of having, and she will heal what consumption took away. Trust her. Protect her. Love her, was not as a replacement for me, but as the completion of the life we began building together. Some bonds are stronger than death, my darling, and some promises take longer than a lifetime to keep. The girl with ice blue eyes is your future. Find her, fight for her, and remember that love multiplies rather than divides. All my love, always and forever, Isabella. P.S. Look for the music box key. The melody will tell you everything you need to know. Marcus read the letter 3 times each pass, making less sense than the last. A woman with ice blue eyes coming in winter. It sounded like the fevered imagination of someone whose illness had affected her mind, except Isabella had been lucid until the very end, practical and grounded even as consumption slowly stole her breath. He was still puzzling over the words when Carlos appeared in the doorway, his weathered face creased with concern. Patron, the storm's moving faster than expected. We've got all the livestock secured, but... Carlos paused, studying Marcus's expression. You look like you've seen a ghost. Maybe I have. Marcus folded the letter carefully, slipping it into his vest pocket next to his heart. What's the situation outside? Bad and getting worse. The men are betting this one will bury the territory for a week. Carlos stepped closer, his dark eyes worried. But that ain't what's troubling me. I just rode back from the south pasture, and there's smoke coming from the old Brennan cabin. Marcus felt his blood chill. The Brennan place had been abandoned for over a year, ever since the family moved back east, after losing half their herd to wolves. Nobody should be there, especially not in weather like this. Smoke means people, Marcus said grimly. People means someone's going to die if they stay there when this storm hits full force. The Brennan cabin was barely standing on its best day. In a Montana blizzard, it would become a death trap. Marcus was already reaching for his heavy coat when Carlos caught his arm. Boss, you can't ride out in this. Temperature's dropping fast and visibility's already down to nothing. Then we better move fast. Marcus shrugged into his coat, checking the loads in his Colt out of habit. Someone's out there, Carlos. Could be travelers caught by the storm, could be drifters looking for shelter. Either way, they're dead if we don't get them. I'll saddle Thunder, Carlos said, recognizing the set of Marcus's jaw. After 12 years of working together, he knew better than to argue when his boss had made up his mind. The ride to the Brennan cabin was a nightmare of driving wind and snow so thick Marcus could barely see Thunder's ears. The big stallion picked his way carefully through drifts that were already knee-deep, his breath forming ice crystals in the bitter air. But as they got closer to the cabin, Marcus could make out more than just smoke. There were voices, a woman's voice strained with exhaustion and fear, and what sounded like children crying. Children, out here in this weather. Marcus dismounted 20 yards from the cabin, leaving Thunder ground-tied behind a stand of pines that offered some protection from the wind. The structure looked even worse than he'd remembered. Half the roof sagged under old snow gaps and the chinking let the wind whistle through, and what passed for windows were covered with old blankets and pieces of canvas. He approached the door carefully, not wanting to startle whoever was inside. "Hello in there," he called, having to shout over the wind. "Anyone hurt?" The voices inside stopped immediately. Then after a long pause, a woman's voice called back, careful, wary, but trying to sound strong. "Go away, we're fine here." Marcus blinked in surprise. That was not the response he'd expected. "Ma'am, there's a blizzard coming. This cabin won't survive it. You need to come with me now." I said, "We're fine." But even through the door, he could hear the desperation beneath the defiance, the edge of panic that came with being trapped and running out of options. "Look, I don't know who you are or what you're running from," Marcus said, gentling his voice. "But none of that matters right now. This storm's going to kill anyone caught out here, especially in a place like this." Silence. Then the sound of urgent whispering. A woman and what definitely sounded like children. Multiple children, at least two different voices, maybe three. Marcus's chest tightened with a familiar ache. He dreamed of children's voices in this house for 5 years, had watched Isabella's face light up whenever they talked about the family they'd have someday. Now here he was listening to real children who might die if he couldn't convince their mother to trust him. The door opened a crack, and Marcus found himself looking into the most extraordinary eyes he'd ever seen, aside from Isabella's. They were the color of winter sky just before dawn, ice blue and startlingly beautiful, set in a face that might have been lovely if not for the lines of exhaustion and worry carved there. The woman was young, maybe 26 or 27, with dark chestnut hair that hung in tangled waves around her shoulders. She held herself like someone who'd learned to be ready for trouble, one hand resting on the doorframe in a way that suggested she was prepared to slam it shut at the first sign of danger. "You're not with Victor Blackwood?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Never heard of Victor Blackwood," Marcus said truthfully. "I'm Marcus Thornfield from Iron Creek Ranch, about 5 miles north of here. And right now, I'm your best hope of surviving the night." Something in his tone must have convinced her, because after another moment of hesitation, she opened the door wider. What Marcus saw inside made him forget the cold entirely. The cabin was barely habitable. Wind whistled through gaps in the walls where the chinking had failed, and the only heat came from a small, struggling fire in a stone fireplace that looked ready to collapse. The floor was dirt covered with old blankets, and everything smelled of damp and desperation. Huddled near the fire were three children who broke Marcus's heart just by existing. A boy of perhaps 12 with defiant eyes and protective posture, clearly trying to be the man of the family. A girl around 8 with her mother's chestnut hair and solemn expression holding a rag doll that had seen better days. And a tiny thing of maybe 3 years old who was coughing in a way that made Marcus's blood run cold. A deep rattling sound that spoke of serious illness. The woman, their mother clearly, stepped protectively in front of them. "We'll manage, the storm will pass and—" "Ma'am," Marcus interrupted gently, crouching down so he wouldn't seem threatening. "That little one sounds very sick. And this place—" He gestured around the cabin where snow was already beginning to blow in through the gaps in the walls. "It won't survive what's coming." The tiny girl's coughing grew worse, a harsh barking sound that seemed to tear at her small chest. The mother's composure finally cracked tears, filling those ice blue eyes. Ice blue eyes. Marcus felt the world shift around him as Isabella's words echoed in his mind. "Watch for a woman with ice blue eyes. Marcus, she will come when the winter is darkest." I can't pay you," the woman whispered, her voice breaking with exhaustion and desperation. "And I won't accept charity." "This isn't charity," Marcus said, forcing his voice to remain steady despite the thundering of his heart. "It's basic human decency. Now gather what you can carry. We need to move before this storm gets worse." For a moment he thought she'd refuse again, but then the little girl coughed again, a sound like fabric tearing, and the mother's shoulders sagged in defeat. "Children," she said quietly, "get your coats." The boy, her son, stepped forward, his young face hard with suspicion and premature wisdom. "We don't know him, Mama. How do we know he ain't lying?" "James." The woman's voice held warning, but Marcus could hear the love beneath it, the fierce protectiveness of a mother who'd clearly been through hell to keep her children safe. "It's all right," Marcus said, looking directly at the boy and speaking to him as one man to another. "You're right to be suspicious, son. A man should protect his family. But right now, protecting them means trusting me." James studied Marcus's face for a long moment, taking in the steady gaze, the calloused hands that spoke of honest work, the way Marcus positioned himself to block the wind from reaching the children. Finally, slowly, the boy nodded. "All right, but if you hurt them, mister, I'll find a way to make you pay." The simple statement, delivered with absolute sincerity by a 12-year-old boy, should have been amusing. Instead, Marcus felt a stab of respect for the kid's fierce protectiveness and a familiar ache of loss. This was the kind of boy he and Isabella had dreamed of raising. Brave, loyal, willing to fight for what mattered. "Fair enough," Marcus said seriously. "I give you my word, no harm will come to your family while you're under my roof. Any of you." As the family gathered their meager possessions, a few changes of clothes, some dried food, a worn Bible, Marcus caught the mother's arm gently. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "Catherine," she said, not meeting his eyes. "Catherine Reed. These are my children, James, Lucy, and Rose." Catherine. Not the name Isabella had mentioned, but then again the letter hadn't mentioned a name at all, just ice blue eyes and a promise that seemed impossible to believe. "Well, Catherine Reed," Marcus said, "let's get you and your children somewhere warm." The journey back to Iron Creek Ranch was the longest 5 miles of Marcus's life. The wind had picked up to a howling fury, driving snow so thick he could barely see Thunder's ears. Catherine rode behind him on Thunder Little Rose bundled against her chest, while James and Lucy rode double on Carlos's horse. Every few minutes, Marcus glanced back to check on them, his heart clenching each time he saw Catherine's white-knuckled grip on Rose, the way the little girl's coughing seemed to be getting worse, despite the protection of her mother's coat. By the time they reached Iron Creek Ranch, all of them were half frozen and completely exhausted. Rose's breathing had become frighteningly shallow, and Catherine's lips had taken on a blue tinge that had nothing to do with the cold and everything to do with fear. "Carlos," Marcus shouted as they reached the main house, "send someone for Doc Henley." "Already done, Patron," Carlos called back, helping James and Lucy down from his horse. "Spotted you coming and sent Rodriguez flying. Doc should be here within the hour." Marcus lifted Catherine down from Thunder's back, feeling how she swayed with exhaustion, how her whole body shook with more than cold. Rose was barely conscious in her arms, her breathing labored and her small face flushed with fever. "Come on," Marcus said, guiding them toward the house. "Let's get you all warmed up." Iron Creek Ranch had been built to impress back when Marcus still believed that success could fill the hollow places in a man's heart. The main house was a sprawling log structure with wide porches, tall windows, and enough rooms to house the large family he had once planned to fill it with. Now, as he ushered Catherine and her children into the spacious front hall, Marcus saw it through their eyes. The polished wood floors, the stone fireplace big enough to roast a whole steer, the chandelier Isabella had insisted on having, shipped all the way from Chicago. It was beautiful, comfortable, and utterly empty of the life it had been designed to contain. "Sweet Mary," Catherine breathed, her ice blue eyes wide as she took in the grandeur around her. This is your home for what it's worth," Marcus said, realizing how hollow the word sounded. "All this luxury, and for the past 4 years he'd rattled around in it like a dried pea in a gourd." Lucy, the 8-year-old, had stopped in the middle of the hall, her eyes fixed on the massive Christmas tree that Carlos's wife Maria had insisted on putting up, despite Marcus's lack of holiday spirit. It was decorated with handmade ornaments and strings of cranberries, and in the light from the fireplace, it looked like something from a fairy tale. "Mama," Lucy whispered, "it's like a castle." James remained quiet, but Marcus could see him taking in every detail. The exits, the potential weapons, the layout of the house. The boy was thinking like someone who'd learned to always have an escape plan ready. "Maria," Marcus called. "We have guests." Maria Mendoza appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. She was a small, round woman with kind eyes and the no-nonsense manner of someone who'd raised 6 children of her own. She took one look at Catherine's exhausted face, and Rose's flushed cheeks and immediately went into action. Ay Dios mío, she murmured, reaching for Rose. This little one is burning up. Come bring her to the kitchen where it's warm. I'll have soup ready in no time and blankets and... The doctor's on his way, Marcus said, following Maria toward the kitchen. Carlos sent for him. The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Doc Henley arrived despite the worsening storm, his weathered face grim as he examined Rose. Catherine hovered nearby, her hands clenched so tightly her knuckles were white, while James and Lucy sat close together on a bench near the kitchen fire. Marcus found himself watching the family dynamics with a strange mixture of pain and wonder. The way Catherine smoothed Lucy's hair while listening to the doctor's diagnosis, the way James tried to look brave while clearly terrified for his little sister, the way all of them drew strength from each other despite their circumstances. It reminded him achingly of the family he'd dreamed of having with Isabella. Pneumonia, Doc Henley announced, finally pulling his stethoscope away from Rose's small chest. But caught early enough. With proper care, warmth, and rest, she should recover fine. The relief on Catherine's face was beautiful to see. She sagged against the wall, tears streaming down her cheeks, and for a moment Marcus had to fight the urge to put his arms around her. She'll need to stay warm and quiet for at least a week. The doctor continued packing his instruments. Maybe 2. And these other children should be watched for symptoms. Catherine's face fell as the implications hit her. I understand. If there's somewhere in town, you'll stay here, Marcus said firmly, his tone brooking no argument. All of you, until Rose is well and the roads are clear. I can't accept. You can and you will. Marcus moved closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. Catherine, your daughter nearly died tonight. This storm's going to last for days, maybe a week. You have nowhere else to go, and I have more empty rooms than I know what to do with. Catherine opened her mouth to protest again, but James stepped forward before she could speak. The 12-year-old looked directly at Marcus, his young face serious. Thank you, the boy said simply, for helping us, for saving Rose. The quiet dignity in those words hit Marcus like a physical blow. This child had been forced to grow up too fast, had taken on responsibilities no boy should have to carry, and yet he still remembered his manners, still understood the importance of gratitude. You're welcome, Marcus said, his voice rougher than he intended. As Maria bustled about preparing rooms and gathering clothes that might fit as Doc Henley gave final instructions for Rose's care, Marcus remained in the kitchen, staring into the fire and wondering what force of fate had brought this family to his door. Ice blue eyes, children who needed protecting, a mother who fought like a lioness to keep them safe. Everything Isabella's letter had promised delivered in the middle of the worst storm in a decade. Coincidence or something else entirely? The sound of footsteps made him turn. Catherine stood in the doorway, having changed into one of Isabella's old dresses that Maria must have found for her. The deep green color brought out her eyes and made her chestnut hair gleam in the firelight, and for a moment she looked so much like... not Isabella. Catherine was entirely her own person, with her own strength and beauty and grace. But there was something familiar about her, something that tugged at the edges of Marcus's memory like a half-remembered song. The children are settled, Catherine said quietly. Rose is breathing much easier already. I wanted to thank you properly. No need, Marcus's voice came out rougher than he intended. Anyone would have done the same. Catherine stepped into the room, her stocking and feet silent on the stone floor. No, they wouldn't have. Most people would have ridden past a broken-down cabin and told themselves it wasn't their problem. She was probably right, but Marcus didn't want her gratitude. Gratitude implied connection, and connection led to pain. He'd learned that lesson the hardest way possible. You should get some rest, he said, turning back to the fire. Tomorrow we'll figure out what comes next. But Catherine didn't leave. Instead, she moved closer to the fireplace, holding her hands out to the warmth. In the golden light, Marcus could see the fine bones of her wrists, the way exhaustion had carved shadows under those remarkable eyes. Mr. Thornfield, she said softly, I need you to know, I'm not what you might think. I'm not some helpless woman looking for a man to take care of her and her children. Marcus turned to look at her, surprised by the quiet dignity in her voice despite everything she'd been through. What are you then? Catherine met his eyes steadily, and in their ice-blue depths he saw strength that had been tested by fire and refined into something unbreakable. I'm a woman who's made some difficult choices to protect her children. I've had some bad luck, lost some important things, but I'm not broken, and I won't be anyone's burden or charity case. The honesty in her voice, the quiet pride despite her circumstances, hit Marcus like a blow to the chest. Here was a woman who'd just been rescued from a freezing cabin with 3 children who had nothing but the clothes on her back, and she was worried about maintaining her dignity. Isabella used to say something similar, he found himself saying before he could stop the words. Isabella, my wife, she died 4 years ago. Catherine's expression softened with understanding and sympathy. I'm sorry, that must have been devastating. The simple acknowledgement without platitudes or attempts to make him feel better was somehow exactly what he needed to hear. It was. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, 2 people who understood loss in ways most couldn't. Finally, Catherine spoke again, her voice soft with old pain. My husband died 2 years ago. Work accident at a sawmill. Since then it's been... She shrugged the gesture encompassing everything. Poverty struggle, the constant fear of not being able to provide for her children. What brought you to the Brennan cabin? Catherine's face tightened, and for a moment Marcus thought she wouldn't answer. When she did, her voice was barely above a whisper. We were staying in Bozeman, but I lost my job at the dress shop when the owner's son decided I should be grateful for his attention. When I refused his advances, he made sure no one else in town would hire me. Marcus felt anger flare in his chest, clean and cold. So you took the children and ran? To an abandoned cabin in the middle of nowhere, yes. Catherine's laugh held no humor. Not my smartest decision, but I was desperate. And there was someone else. Someone who made it clear that staying in town wasn't safe for any of us. The way she said it, the careful neutrality in her voice told Marcus there was more to the story. Much more. But he didn't push. Catherine would tell him what she was ready to tell him and not before. Catherine, he said quietly, and she looked up at the sound of her name on his lips. You and the children can stay here as long as you need to. No strings, no expectations, no obligations. Just stay. The offer hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility and danger. Catherine studied his face for a long moment, and Marcus had the strange feeling she was seeing more than he wanted to reveal. Why? She asked simply. You don't know us. We could be anyone. Marcus looked around the silent house with its empty rooms and echoing halls and gave her the only truth he could. Because I think we might save each other. Catherine's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back before they could fall. I do not know how to accept help without giving something in return. Then don't accept it as help, Marcus said, remembering Isabella's practical nature, her insistence on fairness in all things. Accept it as a business arrangement. You clearly know how to care for children and run a household. This place needs someone who understands what it means to make a house into a home. It was a transparent excuse, and they both knew it. But it gave Catherine a way to maintain her dignity while accepting what she desperately needed for her children. A business arrangement, she repeated, a small smile tugging at her lips for the first time since he'd found her. Exactly. As Catherine headed upstairs to check on her children one final time, Marcus remained by the kitchen fire, his mind churning with emotions he'd thought buried forever. For the first time in 4 years, Iron Creek Ranch felt less like a mausoleum and more like a home. But homes Marcus knew were fragile things, and he'd already lost one family to forces beyond his control. The question was whether he had the courage to risk his heart again, especially when he was beginning to suspect that danger had followed Catherine Reed and her children through the snow. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside the walls of Iron Creek Ranch, something new was beginning to bloom in the darkness. Tentative and fragile, but undeniably real. The first seeds of a second chance delivered by a woman with ice-blue eyes who might just be the miracle Isabella had promised. Dawn broke clear and blindingly bright over a world transformed by snow. Marcus stood at his bedroom window, watching the sun turn the drifts into fields of diamonds, and marveled at how different everything looked in the light. Even the familiar landmarks of his ranch seemed new, softened, and made magical by the overnight transformation. From somewhere below came a sound Iron Creek Ranch hadn't heard in 4 years. The laughter of children. The unfamiliar music of it made Marcus's chest tight with an emotion he couldn't quite name. He dressed quickly and headed downstairs, following the voices to the kitchen, where he found a scene that stopped him in his tracks. Catherine stood at the stove, efficiently managing what looked like enough breakfast to feed a small army, while her three children sat at the long wooden table that had been too big for just him for far too long. James, the 12-year-old, was helping little Lucy cut her pancakes, his movements gentle despite the serious expression he seemed to wear like armor. Baby Rose sat in a makeshift high chair Carlos must have rigged up her fever, clearly broken babbling happily, while she destroyed a piece of toast with the thoroughness only a 3-year-old could achieve. But it was Catherine who drew Marcus's attention and held it. In the morning light streaming through the kitchen windows, wearing one of Isabella's simple house dresses, she looked right. As if she belonged there, as if the kitchen had been waiting for her, specifically to bring it back to life. "Good morning," she said, glancing up from the stove, with a smile that transformed her tired features. "I hope you don't mind. I've found eggs and flour, and the children were hungry." "Of course not." Marcus's voice came out rougher than he intended. "How's Rose?" "Much better. The fever broke around 3 in the morning." Catherine's smile widened with relief and gratitude. Dr. Henley was right. She just needed warmth and rest. Lucy looked up from her pancake syrup, decorating her chin in a way that made Marcus think of Isabella's stories about messy childhood breakfasts back in Pennsylvania. "Mr. Thornfield, are you really rich?" the 8-year-old asked, with the devastating directness only children possessed. "Lucy," Catherine scolded, color flooding her cheeks. "That's not a polite question to ask." But Marcus found himself smiling, the first genuine smile to cross his face in months. "I suppose I am by some standards." "Why do you ask?" Lucy considered this seriously, her young face grave. "Because Mama said we couldn't afford for the doctor to come see Rose when she got sick before, but you got him to come out in a blizzard. And this house is really, really big." And James counted at least 100 cows from the upstairs window. "More than 100, Marcus confirmed, touched by the child's honest curiosity. "Would you like to see them after breakfast, once the snow settles a bit?" The transformation in all three children was immediate and dramatic. Even James's carefully maintained reserve cracked, revealing the boy beneath the premature adult responsibility. "Really?" Lucy breathed, her eyes wide with excitement. "Could we pet them? Are they friendly?" "Some of them are," Marcus said, his smile widening at the hope in her voice. "The milk cows especially. They like having their heads scratched." "What about horses?" James asked, trying to sound casual and failing completely. "Do you have horses?" Marcus glanced at the boy, noting the carefully controlled hunger in his voice, the way his hands had stilled on his fork. "A few. Do you know how to ride?" James's face fell slightly. "No, sir. Never had the chance to learn." "Well, that's something we can fix." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Marcus moved to the window and saw Carlos riding up with two men Marcus didn't recognize. Rough-looking characters with the kind of careful alertness that spoke of recent trouble and future violence. Catherine had gone very still beside him, her face draining of color as she saw the strangers. "Do you know them, Basram?" Marcus asked quietly. "No, but—" Catherine's voice was barely a whisper. "They look like the kind of men Victor Blackwood employs." Marcus felt ice form in his veins. "Take the children upstairs. Now." Now, Catherine." The authority in his voice moved her to immediate action. Within minutes, she'd hustled all three children out of the kitchen, though Marcus could see James casting worried glances back over his shoulder. The boy's protective instincts were strong, and Marcus made a mental note to have a serious conversation with him about courage versus foolishness. Carlos appeared in the kitchen doorway, his dark eyes troubled. "Patron, these men say they were looking for a woman and 3 children. Claim she stole money from their employer." "And what did you tell them?" "That I hadn't seen nobody like that, but they're asking to search the property." Carlos's hand rested casually on his gun belt, and Marcus knew his foreman was ready for trouble if it came calling. Marcus stepped onto the back porch, his morning coffee cup still in hand, projecting the image of a man without a care in the world. The two strangers sat their horses with the easy confidence of men accustomed to getting their way through intimidation and violence. The larger of the two, a man with cruel eyes and a scar running from his left ear to the corner of his mouth, spoke first. "Morning, Mr. Thornfield. Name's Garrett. This here's my partner, Pike. We're looking for a woman and her children. Young widow, 3 kids, last seen heading this direction." A lot of travelers pass through, Marcus said mildly, studying the men over his coffee cup. What's your business with them? She stole from our employer. Considerable sum, plus some important documents. He wants them back. Marcus noted the way their hands rested near their guns, the predatory stillness that marked professional killers. Whatever Catherine had taken from their employer, if she'd taken anything at all, these men hadn't been sent to simply retrieve it and ask politely for its return. Haven't seen anyone matching that description? Marcus lied smoothly. But if I do, where should I send word? Garrett's smile was thin and unpleasant. That's mighty neighborly of you, Mr. Thornfield. Our employer, Mr. Blackwood, he's got interests all over the territory. Land development, mining ventures, business loans, that sort of thing. The name confirmed Marcus's growing suspicions. Victor Blackwood was known throughout Montana Territory as a man who used legal loopholes, intimidation, and worse to acquire what he wanted. Property businesses people, Blackwood collected them all with the methodical efficiency of a spider building its web. I'll keep that in mind, Marcus said. Pike, the smaller man, spoke for the first time, his voice carrying a slight accent Marcus couldn't quite place. Funny thing, we asked around Bozeman and folks said you don't usually take in strangers. But there's been smoke from your chimney constant like for 3 days now, and that's a lot of laundry hanging on the line for one man. The observation was uncomfortably accurate. Marcus felt his muscles tense, though his expression remained relaxed. I've got ranch hands living in the bunkhouse year-round. Winter's hard on clothes, and men get particular about their washing when they're stuck indoors too long. Course they do, Garrett agreed, but his eyes were calculating, studying the house's windows as if trying to catch a glimpse of movement inside. Well, we appreciate your time, Mr. Thornfield, but just so you know, Mr. Blackwood's got a long reach and a longer memory. He don't take kindly to folks who interfere with his business arrangements. The threat was politely delivered but unmistakable. Marcus set down his coffee cup with deliberate care, allowing a hint of steel to enter his voice. Mr. Garrett, I've been ranching in Montana Territory for 18 years. I've dealt with claim jumpers, cattle rustlers, horse thieves, and every variety of lowlife this country produces. If your Mr. Blackwood has a problem with how I conduct my affairs on my own land, he's welcome to discuss it with me directly. The two men exchanged glances, clearly recognizing that they'd pushed as far as they safely could. A man who could build an operation like Iron Creek Ranch from nothing wasn't someone to trifle with lightly, and they both knew it. We'll be sure to pass that along, Garrett said, touching his hat brim in mock politeness. You have a good day, Mr. Thornfield. And if you happen to recall seeing anything that might help us locate the lady in question, well, Mr. Blackwood can be real generous to folks who help him recover his stolen property. Marcus watched them ride away, noting the direction they took and the casual way they surveyed his property as they went. They'd be back probably with more men and a different approach. Men like that didn't give up easily when money and reputation were at stake. Trouble? Carlos asked, appearing at his elbow once the riders were out of sight. Could be. Double the watch tonight and make sure the boys stay armed. Post someone at the north pasture gate. Anyone comes calling, after dark, I want to know about it long before they reach the house. Carlos nodded grimly. You got it, boss. What about the woman and her kids? What about them? They're running from more than just bad luck, aren't they? Marcus was quiet for a moment, thinking about Catherine's pale face when she'd seen the strangers, about the way she'd instinctively moved to protect her children, about the fear that had flickered in those ice-blue eyes. Yeah, they are. And we're going to help them. It wasn't a question. Carlos had known Marcus too long, had seen too much of his character over the years to doubt what his boss would do when innocents were threatened by men like Blackwood's hired guns. We're going to help them, Marcus confirmed. Later that morning, after the immediate threat had passed and the children had been reassured that the visitors were just men asking for directions, Marcus found Catherine in the ranch's small library. She was reading to Lucy and Rose while James explored the shelves with barely concealed awe. How many books do you have? James asked, his voice hushed with the reverence of someone who'd rarely seen more than a handful of volumes in one place. I stopped counting at 800, Marcus admitted. Isabella loved to read. She said a house without books was like a body without a soul. Catherine looked up sharply at that something flickering in her ice-blue eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or surprise. Isabella said that You've heard the expression before, Marcus asked, though something in Catherine's reaction suggested a deeper familiarity than just a common saying. Catherine was quiet for a long moment, her hands stilling in Rose's hair. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft with old pain and carefully controlled emotion. I had a sister once, older than me by 6 years. She used to say the exact same thing about books. Catherine's voice caught slightly. She died 4 years ago. Consumption took her just like it takes so many good people. Marcus felt his heart begin to pound, though he couldn't say why. Something about the timing, about the way Catherine had paused, about the familiar ache in her voice when she spoke about loss. What was her name? He asked quietly. Catherine met his eyes and he saw tears gathering there like storm clouds. Isabella. Isabella Thornfield. The world stopped. Marcus stared at Catherine, his mind reeling pieces of an impossible puzzle, clicking together with devastating clarity. The familiar bone structure he'd noticed the night before, the way she moved her hands when she talked, the inflection in her voice when she spoke about books and learning, and the importance of nurturing things back to health. "You're Catherine Reed," he said, slowly remembering now. "Isabella's little sister Catherine. She used to read me parts of your letters." "You're him," Catherine whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks now. "You're the husband she loved so much. Marcus, she wrote about you constantly. Your kindness, your strength, how safe you made her feel." Lucy looked back and forth between the two adults, her 8-year-old instincts picking up on the emotional undercurrents, even if she didn't understand them. "Mama, why are you crying? Is everything all right?" Catherine wiped her cheeks with shaking hands. "These are happy tears, sweetheart. This is, this is your Uncle Marcus." The simple words hit Marcus like a physical blow to the chest. Uncle Marcus, family. The family he'd thought died with Isabella, suddenly restored to him in the form of a sister-in-law he'd never met, and 3 children who carried his beloved wife's blood in their veins. "She never told me your married name." Marcus began, his voice rough with emotion. "In her letters, she always just called you my baby sister Catherine. I never connected." "She didn't know how to tell you," Catherine said softly. "After she married you, our father disowned her for what he called marrying beneath her station. The family cut her off completely, said she'd brought shame on the Reed name by choosing love over social position." Marcus felt anger stir in his chest, not at Catherine, but at the narrow-minded fools who'd rejected Isabella for having the courage to follow her heart. "But you kept writing to each other." "Secret letters passed through a friend in town. Isabella told me everything. About the ranch, about how happy you made her, about—" Catherine's voice broke again. "About how much she wanted children, how her heart broke every month when it didn't happen." Marcus closed his eyes, the pain of those memories still sharp after 4 years. They'd tried for 3 years to have a baby, had gone through the monthly cycle of hope and crushing disappointment, until the wanting had become almost unbearable for both of them. "She never knew," Catherine continued, her voice barely above a whisper, "that I had 3 children. My husband Frank forbade me from mentioning them in my letter, said it would only cause Isabella pain to know about what she couldn't have. And after Isabella died," Marcus asked, his voice hollow with the weight of lost opportunities, "I wanted to write to you then, to offer condolences, to, I don't know, connect with someone who loved her as much as I did. But Frank said it would be inappropriate for a wife to correspond with another man, even her dead sister's husband. And then Frank died, and I was struggling just to keep the children fed and housed." Catherine's voice trailed off, and Marcus saw the weight of all those lost years in her expression. 4 years they could have been family. 4 years when they had both been mourning Isabella alone instead of together. 4 years when these children could have had an uncle who adored them, and he could have had the family connection that might have saved him from the worst of his grief. James had been listening with growing understanding, his young face serious as he processed the revelations. "So you're really our uncle?" he asked Marcus. "Our real uncle, not just a nice man helping us." "I suppose I am," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "And our mama was your wife's sister." "Yes." James considered this with the gravity of someone much older than his 12 years. "That means we belong here, really belong, not just as guests or charity cases." The simple statement, delivered with such matter-of-fact certainty, hit Marcus harder than all of Catherine's explanations. These children, Isabella's niece and nephews, they belonged here. At Iron Creek Ranch, in the home Isabella had loved, surrounded by the family connection she'd always cherished above all else. Yes, Marcus said, his voice breaking slightly. You belong here. All of you. Catherine was crying openly now, 4 years of grief and loneliness and fear finally finding release. Marcus moved toward her instinctively, then stopped, unsure of his welcome or the appropriateness of the gesture. Catherine looked up at him through her tears and solved his dilemma by stepping into his arms. The embrace was careful, tentative at first. Two people who barely knew each other yet were bound by love for the same remarkable woman. But as Marcus felt Catherine's shoulders shake with suppressed grief as he breathed in the scent of her hair and felt the trust in the way she leaned against him, something profound shifted in his chest. This wasn't Isabella. Catherine was her own person entirely, with her own strength and beauty and grace. But she was family in the truest sense. Someone who'd loved Isabella as fiercely as he had, someone who understood the magnitude of their loss, someone who could share memories and stories that no one else would ever fully understand. She told me so much about you, Catherine whispered against his chest. About your morning rides to check the cattle, about how you always brought her wildflowers from the meadow, about the way you'd read to her when the coughing got bad. She made you sound like a character from one of her novels. Too good to be real. Marcus's arms tightened around her. She was the one who was too good to be real. I used to wonder every day what I'd done to deserve her. She felt the same way about you. Every letter was full of gratitude for the life you'd given her, the safety and love she'd never expected to find. Around them, the children watched with the remarkable adaptability of youth. Lucy had moved to sit beside James on the sofa, while little Rose continued to babble contentedly, oblivious to the life-changing revelations swirling around her. So what happens now? James asked with characteristic directness. Marcus looked at the boy, his nephew, Isabella's nephew, and felt a fierce protectiveness rise in his chest. Now we figure out how to be a family, and how to keep you safe from the men who were here this morning. Catherine stiffened in his arms. They found us. But they didn't find anything, and they won't as long as you're under my protection. Marcus, you don't understand. Catherine pulled back to look at him, her face white with renewed fear. Victor Blackwood, he doesn't just give up. And if he finds out who I really am, who you are, she swallowed hard, he'll use our connection against both of us. Marcus studied her face, reading the terror there, the desperate need to protect her children, even if it meant running again into the winter wilderness. Catherine, what exactly did you take from Blackwood? Catherine was quiet for so long, Marcus thought she wouldn't answer. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Evidence, letters, financial records, contracts. Proof that he's been cheating families out of their land through fraudulent deals. Proof that when people still won't sell or can't pay the impossible terms of his loans, she swallowed hard, her face going even paler. Proof that he arranges accidents. The ice in Marcus's veins turned to fire. What kind of accidents? Mine collapses that aren't really accidents. Bridge failures during spring floods. Equipment that suddenly malfunctions at exactly the wrong moment. Catherine's voice was steady now, though her hands shook. My husband Frank discovered the pattern while working on legal documents for some of Blackwood's business partners. He was going to expose everything, take the evidence to the territorial authorities, but before he could... The sawmill accident. Catherine nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks again. A cable that had been deliberately weakened. Frank knew too much, so Blackwood had him killed and made it look like industrial negligence. Marcus felt rage building in his chest, clean and cold, and utterly focused. This monster hadn't just terrorized Catherine and her children. He'd murdered their father and husband and was now hunting them down to silence the only witness to his crimes. Where are the documents now? Hidden, safe, but... Catherine met his eyes and he saw the weight of terrible knowledge there. If anything happens to me, if Blackwood gets his hands on me, he'll make me tell him where they are. And then everyone he's hurt, everyone he's going to hurt in the future, they'll never get justice. Marcus was quiet for a moment, his mind racing through possibilities and plans. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority that had built Iron Creek Ranch into one of the most successful operations in Montana Territory. Catherine, I want you to listen to me very carefully. You and the children are under my protection now. Not just because you're Isabella's family, though that would be reason enough, because it's the right thing to do. He cupped her face in his hands, making sure she understood the absolute sincerity in his words. Blackwood can bring all the hired guns he wants. He can make all the threats he likes. But he will not touch one hair on your head or lay one finger on these children. Do you understand me? Catherine searched his face, and whatever she saw there must have convinced her, because some of the terrible tension left her shoulders. You don't know what you're taking on. Then tell me everything, because if we're going to end this, I need to know exactly what we're dealing with. As Catherine began to explain the full scope of Victor Blackwood's criminal enterprise, as the children listened with wide eyes to stories of corruption and murder, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced since Isabella's death purpose. For 4 years, he'd been drifting, existing without direction or meaning, beyond the simple mechanics of running a ranch. Now he had both direction and meaning. He had a family to protect, justice to serve, and a woman whose courage and strength reminded him that love could bloom again, even in the most broken soil. The war with Victor Blackwood was coming, whether Marcus wanted it or not. But this time, unlike when he'd lost Isabella to an enemy he couldn't fight, he wasn't going to be caught unprepared. This time he was going to fight back. This time he was going to win. And this time he was going to make sure his family survived. The attack came 3 nights later, just after midnight, when the moon was dark and the snow muffled the sound of approaching horses. Marcus was in his study reading one of Isabella's journals by lamplight, a nightly ritual he'd maintained since her death, when Carlo burst through the door without knocking, his face grim with urgency. Patron riders coming from 3 directions. At least 15 men, maybe 20. They're trying to surround the house. Marcus's blood turned to ice, but his mind immediately shifted into the cold, calculating mode that had kept him alive through range wars and Indian raids in the early days of building his ranch. 20 men meant this wasn't a reconnaissance mission or an intimidation tactic. This was a full assault designed to overwhelm his defenses and take what Victor Blackwood wanted by force. Get to the house, Marcus commanded, grabbing his rifle from the rack behind his desk. Tell Catherine to take the children to the root cellar. Full defensive protocols. What about you? I'll be right behind you. Move. As Carlos sprinted toward the main house, Marcus took precious seconds to study the approaching riders through his study window. They came from the east, west, and south in coordinated waves, their formation precise and military in its discipline. Professional soldiers or experienced gunfighters, not the usual collection of drifters and desperados men like Blackwood, typically employed for intimidation work. This was serious. This was war. Marcus's heart hammered as he ran toward the house, Isabella's letter still clutched in his hand. In the pale starlight, he could see muzzle flashes from the lead riders, bullets already beginning to strike the outbuildings and corrals. This wasn't going to be a siege. It was going to be a massacre unless he could even the odds quickly. He burst through the kitchen door to find controlled chaos. Catherine was hustling the children toward the hidden cellar entrance while Maria Mendoza gathered weapons and ammunition with the efficiency of a woman who'd lived through Apache raids in her younger days. James stood frozen in the middle of the room, his young face white with terror, but his jaw set with determination. I want to fight, the 12-year-old said, his voice cracking with emotion and forced bravery. I want to help protect Mama and the girls. You will help protect them, Marcus said firmly, dropping to one knee in front of the boy and speaking to him with the respect one man owed another, by staying with them in the cellar and being their last line of defense if everything else fails. Can you handle that responsibility? James nodded gravely, understanding the weight Marcus was placing on his young shoulders. Yes, sir. I won't let anything happen to them. I know you won't. Marcus squeezed the boy's shoulder, then turned to Catherine. Her ice-blue eyes were bright with fear, but her hands were steady as she checked the load in the rifle Maria had given her. I can shoot, she said quietly, her voice calm, despite the gunfire that was growing closer to the house. I know you want me in the cellar with the children, but I need you alive more than I need another gun, Marcus interrupted gently but firmly. Catherine, if something happens to me, you're these children's only protection. Promise me you'll stay hidden. For a moment, Catherine looked like she might argue. Then she nodded, her face set with the same determination he'd seen in James. I promise. But Marcus, she caught his arm as he turned to go. Be careful, please. We, I can't lose you too. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Neither of them had time to examine. Marcus covered her hand with his, squeezing gently. I'll be careful, he promised. And Catherine, we're going to get through this, all of us. The first bullets shattered the kitchen window as they spoke, sending glass flying across the room. Rose screamed and Marcus felt rage flood through him. Clean, cold fury at anyone who would terrorize innocent children. Cellar, now! As Catherine and the children disappeared into the hidden space beneath the kitchen floorboards, Marcus took quick stock of his resources. Carlos, Maria, and 4 ranch hands who'd made it to the house before the shooting started. 7 people against 20 or more professional killers. The odds were terrible, but Marcus had advantages Blackwood couldn't have anticipated. Iron Creek Ranch had been built with defense in Shinderman, constructed during the height of the Indian Troubles when attacks were a constant threat. The walls were thick logs that could stop rifle bullets, and the windows were positioned for maximum defensive fire, and Marcus had spent years stockpiling ammunition and weapons for exactly this kind of situation. More importantly, he was fighting for family now, for Isabella's sister and her children, for the second chance at happiness he'd never expected to find. And a man defending his family was capable of things that would surprise even himself. Carlos, take Rodriguez and Mitchell to the second floor. East and south windows. Maria, you and Sanchez cover the back entrance. Jake, you're with me on the main parlor. The next 2 hours were a nightmare of smoke gunfire and desperate tactical maneuvering. Blackwood's men were good, professional, disciplined, coordinated in their assault like soldiers rather than common outlaws. But they were attacking a fortress defended by people who had everything to lose. Still, Marcus knew they were slowly being overwhelmed. For every attacker his small group brought down, it seemed like 2 more took his place. The house's first-floor windows were shot out, smoke from burning outbuildings was beginning to seep through the walls, and he could hear Blackwood's men moving closer to the main structure with each passing minute. Then Rodriguez called out from upstairs, his voice tight with alarm. Boss, they're setting fire to the barn. Marcus's heart stopped. The barn wasn't just a building. It housed 40 head of his best breeding stock horses that represented years of careful selection and training. More critically, if the fire spread to the house with Catherine and the children trapped in the cellar. That's when he heard it, a new sound cutting through the gunfire like a cavalry charge from heaven itself. The thunder of approaching hoofbeats coming hard from the north road. Marcus risked a glance through a shattered window and felt his heart leap with desperate hope. A column of riders was approaching at full gallop, and at their head rode a figure he recognized, Sheriff Tom Bradley, leading what looked like every able-bodied man from 3 counties. Cavalry's coming, Carlos shouted from upstairs, his voice carrying relief and fierce satisfaction. Looks like half the territory's riding with them. The effect on Blackwood's assault was immediate and dramatic. Caught between the defending ranch and the approaching posse, his men found themselves in exactly the kind of crossfire that turned confident attackers into desperate survivors. This is Sheriff Bradley. The lawman's voice carried clearly over the gunfire amplified by the cold night air. Victor Blackwood, you and your men are under arrest. Throw down your weapons and surrender. What followed was a brief, vicious firefight as Blackwood's remaining men tried to shoot their way out of the trap they'd ridden into. But caught between 2 forces and with no avenue of retreat except across open ground, the outcome was inevitable. When the shooting finally stopped, 14 of Blackwood's men lay dead in the snow around Iron Creek Ranch. 6 more were wounded and captured, including Garrett, who'd taken a bullet through the thigh and was cursing his employer with the creativity of a man who knew he'd been abandoned to face the consequences alone. But Victor Blackwood himself was nowhere to be found. Sheriff Bradley dismounted near the house, his weathered face grim as he surveyed the destruction. Bullet holes in the walls, burned out buildings, blood staining the pristine snow. Marcus, you folks all right? We're fine, Tom. Marcus stepped onto the porch, his rifle still ready, eyes scanning the surrounding area for any sign of the man who'd orchestrated this attack. How did you know to come? Bradley's expression was carefully neutral, professional. Got an interesting visitor 2 days ago, young lady named Catherine Reed. She brought me a leather satchel full of documents that make for some mighty compelling reading. Marcus's blood chilled. Catherine went to town, rode in alone while you were checking the north pasture, said she had evidence about Victor Blackwood that the law needed to see. Bradley's eyes were sharp as he studied Marcus's face. Didn't mention she was staying at Iron Creek Ranch, though. Seemed to think that information might put you in danger. Before Marcus could respond, a new voice cut through the night air, smooth-cultured and utterly without remorse or fear. Gentlemen, what an impressive display of frontier justice. Everyone turned to see Victor Blackwood himself emerging from behind the smoking ruins of the barn. Catherine Reed held firmly in front of him with a gun pressed to her temple. Even at a distance, Marcus could see the terror in her ice-blue eyes, the way she held herself perfectly still and avoid giving Blackwood any excuse to pull the trigger. Blackwood was a tall, elegant man in his 50s, dressed in expensive clothes that seemed utterly out of place in the aftermath of a gun battle. His pale eyes held the cold calculation of a predator who'd never known doubt or conscience, and his smile was the most terrifying thing Marcus had ever seen. Victor, Sheriff Bradley, said, his voice steady but his hand moving toward his weapon. Let the woman go. You're surrounded, and it's over. Blackwood laughed, the sound like breaking crystal in the cold air. I think not, Sheriff. You see, Mrs. Reed here has something that belongs to me, and I have something that belongs to her. Her life and the lives of those charming children she's so desperate to protect. Marcus felt the world narrow to a single point of focus, the gun pressed against Catherine's head, the finger resting on the trigger, the calm certainty in Blackwood's pale eyes. Every instinct screamed at him to charge forward, to end this with violence and fury, but one wrong move would cost Catherine everything. What do you want, Blackwood? Marcus called out, surprised by how steady his own voice sounded. Simple enough. The return of my property. The documents Mrs. Reed stole from my office safe, along with her promise to never speak of what she thinks she knows about my business practices. The documents are already with the sheriff. Catherine said, her voice strong despite her circumstances. It's over, Victor. Everyone knows what you are now. Blackwood's grip tightened on her, and Marcus saw her wince as the gun barrel pressed harder against her temple. Clever woman, but not quite clever enough. You see, without the star witness to authenticate those documents, they're just papers, hearsay, insufficient evidence for a conviction. The implication was clear. Blackwood intended to kill Catherine, whether he got the documents back or not. She was the only person who could testify to his crimes, and dead witnesses couldn't speak in courtrooms. However, Blackwood continued, his voice taking on the tone of a man presenting a generous business offer. I'm feeling magnanimous tonight. Mr. Thornfield, I understand Mrs. Reed and her children have been staying in your home, grown attached to them perhaps. Marcus felt ice form in his veins as he realized where this was heading. Here's my proposition, Blackwood said, his smile widening with cruel satisfaction. You deed Iron Creek Ranch to me, full ownership and no conditions, no legal complications, and I'll let Mrs. Reed live. She can even take her children and disappear wherever she likes. A generous trade, I think, one woman's life for one piece of property. Don't do it, Catherine called out, her voice fierce with determination despite the gun at her head. Marcus, don't you dare. This place was Isabella's home. You can't let him destroy that. Blackwood's backhand was swift and brutal, snapping Catherine's head to the side and splitting her lip. Marcus saw red, his vision narrowing to a single point of murderous focus, and had taken 3 steps forward before Sheriff Bradley's hand on his arm stopped him. Think, Marcus, Bradley said quietly. One wrong move and she's dead. Blackwood smiled at Marcus's rage, clearly enjoying the power he held over the situation. Such devotion. How touching. Though I have to wonder, is this really about Justice Thornfield? Or is it about something more personal? Tell me, have you grown fond of the lovely widow? Perhaps even imagined yourself playing happy family with her and those children? The taunt hit its mark, and Blackwood pressed his advantage with the skill of a man who understood how to find and exploit weakness. Yes, I can see it in your eyes. You've grown attached to them. How deliciously naive. But I'll give you exactly 60 seconds to make your decision, starting now. Marcus's mind raced through possibilities, all of them bad. Blackwood had positioned himself well, too far from any cover for a rescue attempt, too close to Catherine, for any of Bradley's men to risk a shot. And every second that passed brought them closer to the moment when Blackwood would decide Catherine was more valuable as an example than as a bargaining chip. Then Marcus heard it, a sound so soft he almost missed it over the wind and the distant crackling of burning wood. The creak of a board from inside the house, barely audible but unmistakable to someone who knew every sound his home made. Someone was moving through the building, someone Blackwood's men hadn't accounted for in their assault. James, Marcus's heart hammered as he realized what the boy was doing. Somehow the 12-year-old had gotten out of the cellar and was moving through the house, probably trying to get a clear shot at Blackwood from one of the upstairs windows. It was brave beyond measure and almost certainly suicidal. James was a decent shot with a rifle, but Blackwood was a professional killer with years of experience in violence. And if the boy missed, if he revealed himself without ending the threat. 30 seconds. Thornfield. Blackwood called out, his voice carrying cruel satisfaction. What's it going to be, your ranch or her life? Marcus made his decision. If James was going to take a shot, Marcus needed to give him the best possible chance. That meant getting Blackwood's attention focused entirely on him, making himself the obvious and immediate threat. All right, Marcus said, stepping forward with his hands visible and empty. You win, Blackwood. I will sign over the ranch. Blackwood's smile was triumphant and predatory. I thought you might see reason. Sheriff Bradley, I trust you'll witness the transaction and ensure it's all legal and binding. I'll witness it, Bradley said grimly, his hand still resting on his gun. But Blackwood, if you hurt that woman after Thornfield signs, I'll hunt you to the ends of the earth. Such drama, Blackwood laughed, his attention fixed on Marcus and the sheriff, his grip on Catherine relaxing slightly as victory seemed assured. Don't worry, Sheriff. I'm a man of my word. Mrs. Reed will be free to go once the paperwork is... The rifle shot came from the second-floor window, loud as thunder in the cold northwestern air. Marcus watched Blackwood jerk backward, surprise and pain flashing across his features as James's bullet took him in the shoulder, spinning him around and loosening his grip on Catherine. It was the chance Marcus had been waiting for, the split second of opportunity he'd been praying for. He launched himself forward, covering the distance between himself and Blackwood in 3 long strides. Catherine had the presence of mind to throw herself sideways, putting distance between herself and her captor, just as Marcus's shoulder took Blackwood in the midsection. They went down hard in the snow, rolling and fighting for control of Blackwood's pistol. The man was smaller than Marcus, but vicious, fighting with the desperate fury of someone who knew capture meant the hangman's noose. Blackwood managed to get his gun, hand partially free, and brought it around toward Marcus's head. But Catherine was there suddenly, her boot connecting solidly with Blackwood's wrist and sending the weapon spinning away across the snow. That's for Frank, she said fiercely, and kicked him again, harder this time. And that's for threatening my children. Sheriff Bradley and his deputies were there then, hauling Blackwood to his feet and snapping iron shackles around his wrists. The man's shoulder was bleeding freely from James's shot, and his face was a mask of rage and disbelief at how quickly his victory had turned to defeat. You think this ends anything? Blackwood snarled at Marcus, his cultured veneer finally cracking to reveal the vicious animal beneath. You think taking me down solves your problems? I have partners, Thornfield. Men with more money and longer reach than you can imagine. They won't forget this insult. Let them come, Marcus said quietly, helping Catherine to her feet and checking her for injuries. I'll be ready. As the deputies led Blackwood away, Marcus turned to find Catherine in his arms, both of them shaking with reaction and relief. Her lip was split from Blackwood's blow, and there were bruises forming on her wrists where he'd gripped her, but she was alive and whole and safe. James, Catherine whispered against Marcus's chest, her voice thick with maternal worry. Is he? Right here, Mama. The boy's voice came from the house's front door, and Marcus looked up to see him standing there, with Carlos's rifle still in his hands, his young face pale but determined. I couldn't let him hurt you. Marcus disengaged from Catherine and walked to James, dropping to one knee in front of the boy who'd just saved all their lives. That was the bravest thing I've ever seen, he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion and pride. Your father would have been proud of you. James's composure finally cracked and he launched himself into Marcus's arms with a sob. I was so scared I'd miss, he whispered. I was so scared I'd hit Mama instead of him. But you didn't miss, Marcus said, holding the boy tight and feeling his own eyes burn with unshed tears. You saved her. You saved all of us. As the immediate crisis passed and the full scope of their survival became clear, Marcus found himself looking around at the faces surrounding him. Catherine, bruised but unbroken, her ice blue eyes bright with tears of relief, and something deeper. Love, perhaps, or at least the beginning of it. James no longer trying to be a man beyond his years, but simply a brave boy who'd protected his family. Lucy and Rose emerging from the cellar with Maria, their faces lighting up when they saw their mother safe and whole. His family. Not the one he'd been born to, or the one he'd lost with Isabella, but the one he'd chosen and fought for and nearly died defending. The one Isabella had somehow impossibly sent to him in his darkest hour. Sheriff Bradley approached with a leather satchel in his hands, the same evidence Catherine had risked everything to preserve and deliver. This should be enough to put Blackwood away for life, he said, assuming he lives long enough to stand trial. But there's something else in here, something I think you should see. Bradley handed Marcus a sealed envelope yellowed with age and marked in Isabella's familiar handwriting, for Marcus and Catherine to be opened when you find each other. Marcus's hands shook as he broke the seal, Catherine reading over his shoulder as he unfolded the pages inside. Isabella's voice seemed to speak to them both across 4 years of separation and grief. My beloved Marcus and my darling sister, Catherine, if you are reading this together, then my final prayer has been answered. I am gone, but the family we all dreamed of is finally complete. Catherine, you will find in Marcus everything I told you about in my secret letters. The kindness, the strength, the capacity for love that knows no limits. He will protect you and the children as fiercely as Frank would have, and he will love them as his own, because that's who he is. Marcus, you will find in Catherine everything I could never give you. The family we always wanted, the laughter of children in our home, the completion of the dream we began building together. She is my sister in all the ways that matter, and loving her will not diminish what we had, but rather fulfill it. I have watched you both grieve alone for too long. Promise me you will grieve no more. Build the life we all deserved, raise those beautiful children together, and remember that love is the only thing that multiplies when you divide it. Some bonds transcend death, my darlings. Some promises take longer than one lifetime to keep. All my love, always and forever, Isabella. Marcus read the letter twice, tears streaming down his face. Catherine's hand warm and steady in his as she read beside him. Even in death, Isabella had been orchestrating happiness for the people she loved, bringing together the family she'd always believed they deserved. She knew, Catherine whispered, her voice wonder-struck and broken with emotion. Somehow she knew we'd need each other. Marcus folded the letter carefully and placed it in his coat pocket next to his heart, where Isabella's love had always lived. Then he turned to Catherine, this remarkable woman who'd brought light back into his life, who'd given him purpose and family and the chance to love again. Catherine Reed, he said, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. I know this isn't the time or place, and I know we've known each other less than a week. But I also know that life is uncertain and love is precious, and I don't want to waste another day pretending I don't feel what I feel. Catherine's ice blue eyes widened as Marcus dropped to one knee in the snow, pulling a ring from his pocket. Isabella's engagement ring, which he'd carried with him every day since her death. Isabella would want you to have this, he said quietly, his voice carrying across the silent gathering of friends and neighbors who'd risked their lives to save them. Not as a replacement for what we lost, but as a symbol of new beginnings and promises kept. Catherine, will you marry me? Will you help me build the family? Isabella dreamed of the life she wanted us to have together. Around them, the children watched with wide eyes and growing smiles. Sheriff Bradley and his men tactfully found other things to occupy their attention. And Catherine Reed, who'd lost everything and risked her life to protect the innocent, looked down at the man kneeling in the snow and saw her future written in his eyes. Yes, she whispered, then louder, strong enough for everyone to hear. Yes, Marcus Thornfield, I'll marry you. As Marcus slipped Isabella's ring onto Catherine's finger, as the children whooped with joy and the gathered crowd applauded, the sun began to rise over the Montana mountains, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of gold and promise. Iron Creek Ranch, scarred by battle but not broken, basked in the light of a new day that would bring new beginnings and second chances. 6 months later, Marcus and Catherine were married in the small church Isabella had loved, with James as Marcus's best man and Lucy and Rose as flower girls, who took their duties very seriously. The ranch had been rebuilt and expanded with new quarters for the growing number of families Marcus had begun taking in, other widows and orphans who needed sanctuary, other victims of men like Victor Blackwood, who thought might made right. And when Catherine gave birth to their son the following spring, they named him Frank Marcus Thornfield, honoring both the father the boy would never know and the man who'd chosen to be his father. Isabella's portrait hung in the nursery, watching over the new life with the same gentle smile that had blessed Marcus's dreams for years. Victor Blackwood died in territorial prison 6 months into his sentence, his empire of corruption and violence dismantled by the evidence Catherine had risked everything to preserve. And Iron Creek Ranch became exactly what Isabella had always believed it could be: a place where love multiplied rather than divided, where family was defined not by blood alone, but by choice and commitment, and the willingness to fight for each other against any odds. Marcus Thornfield had learned that second chances were real, that love could bloom again even in the most frozen soil, and that sometimes the family you needed most was the one you never saw coming. And every morning when he woke beside Catherine, when he heard the laughter of children in the halls Isabella had once walked, he whispered a prayer of gratitude to the wife who'd loved him enough to send him exactly the family he needed to heal. Thank you for joining Marcus and Catherine on their journey from tragedy to triumph, from loneliness to love. Their story shows us that even the darkest chapters of our lives can lead to the most beautiful new beginnings, and that family comes in many forms, all of them precious and worth fighting for. If this tale of second chances and divine intervention touched your heart, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more stories of love conquering adversity. Share in the comments which moment moved you most. Was it James's heroic shot that saved his mother, Catherine's revelation about being Isabella's sister, or Marcus's proposal in the snow after their victory? Don't forget to ring that notification bell so you never miss our latest stories of romance, redemption, and the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. What kind of story would you like to hear next? Let us know in the comments below. Until next time, remember that every ending is also a new beginning, and that love always finds a way to bring the right people together at exactly the right time. Some bonds truly do transcend death, and some promises are worth waiting a lifetime to keep. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.